Boy, WandaVision is just getting wackier and wackier, isn't it? Yes, last week Wanda recast Pietro as the Quicksilver from the X-Men movies. That's who it is, from the X-Men universe, not the Aaron Taylor Johnson Quicksilver that died in Age of Ultron. And this episode continues the hex, as they're calling it, the fantasy world that Wanda has created for herself. And man, there's a lot of ways this show can go. I did a video, I think yesterday on this channel or the day before, depending on where you live, talking about kind of what is going on with WandaVision, what I think is going on, and how it may lead to things in the future. And this episode sort of added to that lore, but I have slightly different thoughts. First of all, the opening of the episode was Malcolm in the Middle. So they're parodying Malcolm in the Middle, which I totally loved. You know, you're not the boss of me now. You know, it was that kind of thing. Totally loved it. This is, of course, the episode that we saw in the trailer where Wanda is dressed like the Scarlet Witch from the 80s from the comics, and so is Vision. They kind of made fun of that, you know. And then, of course, the Easter egg is that Quicksilver is dressed like Quicksilver. He's dressed like the original Quicksilver from the comics, obviously a lot younger. And this was a Halloween-themed episode. You know, we see Evan Peters as Quicksilver in the costume. Kick-Ass was actually mentioned, which popped me because the Kick-Ass movie, this is a meta humor. The Kick-Ass movie starred both Evan Peters and Aaron Taylor Johnson. They were both in Kick-Ass. Both Quicksilvers, but from the X-Men and MCU respectively, were in Kick-Ass. Also, the Yo Magic commercial here was my absolute favorite thing. It was a parody of the stop-motion ads of the 90s that would sell like Capri Sun and things like that, you know, Hawaiian Punch. Really put a big smile on my face. But this episode, kind of the big story here is that Monica Rambeau was kind of rebelling against Sword, or really, you know, Hayward kind of turned his back on her, and she was trying to like figure out a way to get in. She apparently has a guy on the inside who is working for her, who might still be like an agent, and there's all kinds of rumors about that, about who that might be. One of my favorite moments here is when Wanda and Pietro, Peter, as they call him, they have this sort of moment, and they're talking about like, you know, what happened. He's talking about like, I just remember like blacking out and I woke up because you needed me. It was kind of weird because it's sort of like there's a lot of rumors that Quicksilver, Evan Peters, is actually not the Quicksilver from the X-Men universe, that it's actually Mephisto or the Grim Reaper, depending on who you want to believe. Mephisto or the Grim Reaper that's manipulating Wanda, and that could be the case also. Same thing with one of the kids. I'm not sure if that's the case because when you analyze the behavior of Quicksilver in this episode, we know that Quicksilver is not 100% under the control of Wanda. He's not, and neither is the Vision. And obviously the idea here is that these sort of super-powered, super-intelligent characters, remember, Vision was, you know, originally like a computer program in the MCU. So, you know, this whole idea, you know, Jarvis, this whole idea of like Quicksilver being Mephisto, that may not be the case. It may be the case or it may not be the case, because if they really want to go deep with this, it could be that this version of Quicksilver is actually more so an avatar for Wanda's guilt. You know, Wanda's guilt over controlling these people, Wanda's pain over losing her brother in the battle with Ultron created this hex, as they call it, this universe. But maybe she's sort of creating these loose sort of paradigms of her mind. You know what I mean? If you read a lot of the X-Men and you read a lot about the astral plane and you know, Charles Xavier and a lot of that kind of stuff, you know, Psylocke with the psionic powers, if you know about that kind of stuff, you know that this stuff happens all the time where guilt can have a physical manifestation, and maybe Quicksilver is a physical manifestation of Wanda's guilt, or maybe it is the Grim Reaper. He could be trying to get the kids. I mean, who really knows? Some have said that Hayward might be the Grim Reaper, but you know, Wanda reveals in this episode, and I'm going to assume y'all saw it. I'm not going to do play-by-play on the episode, but I'm going to assume you're watching this after you saw the episode. Wanda reveals in this episode that that her loneliness created this universe, this hex. Like, after the events of Endgame, when she almost killed Thanos, you know, she obviously didn't accomplish it, and we really don't see what happened to her, except for we saw her for a minute at Tony Stark's funeral. But you know, after that, she probably had nobody. She had no brother. She had no husband, Vision, or boyfriend, and she probably, you know, didn't really feel like she fit in with the Avengers, like, you know, maybe she did previously. You know, Captain America was gone and Tony was gone, so she then decided, okay, I'm going to create this universe. I don't have anybody. You know, I don't have anybody. And how many of us do that? How many antisocial people in the real world don't really have anybody? Lonely people, especially with the pandemic and everything going on. And we create these universes. We create these realities for ourselves, whether it be on the internet, whether it be in chat rooms, whether it be in our own bedrooms. You know, people do it all the time. So there's deep stuff here. And so there's a moment where she actually sees like Quicksilver's holes in his chest, like what happened with Ultron. So he's definitely a representation of what Quicksilver was to her. So maybe it's not, you know, Grim Reaper. Now, the big moment in the episode is that Vision leaves the Hex, like the Truman Show. Vision leaves the Hex. He walks outside and Sword is there, but he starts to fall apart because, you know, Vision was destroyed. Not entirely, but he was, you know, damaged heavily, killed. You know, there's a conversation with him and Agnes, I'm sorry, where she snaps back to reality. And she's like, you know, there's a subconscious portion of them, of the people that they know that Wanda's controlling this. They know it. People there know it, but they can't break the Hex. You know what I mean? And she's like begging for a Vision to do something about it. That's what leads to him leaving the Hex. And then Billy senses it, and it's kind of weird. So Vision falls outside the Hex, and then Wanda senses this is going on. Quicksilver brings it up and gets knocked away, the dead husband. And then Wanda freezes time inside of the Hex, right? She freezes time and then loses her shit and then like expands the Hex. She makes the Hex bigger. That's kind of the cliffhanger of the episode, in that the Hex is now bigger, and more people are getting sucked inside this fantasy world. And I'm wondering if by the time we get to the season finale, if she's going to make the Hex even bigger and consume other characters or create other characters that are like, you know, from other worlds. There really wasn't any reference here from Pietro about the X-Men universe. There was nothing here about that. He did say he had an XY chromosome or whatever, and I thought that was kind of a clue. You know what I mean? Obviously, we know what that is in the real world, but the fact that he would say an XY chromosome, maybe I'm digging too deeply here. Maybe I'm looking too much into it, but because there were a lot of Easter eggs in this episode. I mean, we saw, like, when they went to the movies, there was, like, The Incredibles, and I forget the other movie, that was shown there in the, like, in the movie theater in the background and whatnot. The late 90s. I mean, I grew up in the late 90s, so I remember that era. You know, I remember what they're referencing. And before the iPod, before the iPad, before the internet was, I mean, it was around, but it wasn't big. You know, the internet was around in the last episode, too, the early internet. Not what it is now with social media and streaming and all this stuff. I mean, hell, this is streaming. But I'm wondering where the show is going here, because the big question now is, you know, we know that Wanda made the Hex bigger, but, you know, is Quicksilver really just a construct of her guilt in her mind? Or is he an actual living being? We're assuming it's not the dead corpse of Quicksilver from the Age of Ultron film. I don't think that's what's going on, but it could be the Grim Reaper playing games with her. I mean, it's difficult to say what's really going on. Hayward could be the Grim Reaper. They're having a split with Sword, and they're having a split with what's going on, and people are getting sucked into the Hex, including Darcy, actually. So that's going to be a cliffhanger for next week. Either way, we know that we have an episode coming up that's going to parody The Office, which could be the next episode. Don't know, but interesting what's going on here with Wanda's powers getting bigger, and is the Hex going to grow even bigger? And then if so, will the entire MCU be affected? Will we have some really weird stuff coming up? And if that's the case, then does Falcon and Winter Soldier, does that take place before this, or will that actually be affected by the Hex? You know, does that happen right before these events or after? And if so, how will this impact that show? We'll find out. Either way, the show is still good. Great episode. I like last week's a tiny bit more, but it was a great episode, and it has me wanting more, and it has me really curious about where this is going. And I really am enjoying this as it goes along. It's a slow burn show, but it's done right. With that being said, I'll leave this video now. What do you think? Let me know in the comments. Thank you, and we'll talk soon.